What happens when Hollywood's brightest stars go home to a struggle no studio can rewrite? Many famous entertainers were raising children with disabilities, when families were often told to hide them, separate them, or expect very little. Some stars became fierce advocates. These 40 stories reveal the family realities Hollywood's glamorous image usually kept out of sight. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more forgotten stories from Hollywood history. Number 1. Elizabeth Taylor. Behind the diamonds, violet eyes, and headline marriages was a mother dealing with years of specialist care. Elizabeth Taylor adopted Maria, a German-born child with a serious congenital hip condition. Richard Burton later became Maria's legal father, bringing her into one of Hollywood's most famous blended families. Maria needed repeated medical treatment and several operations while she was young. At the same time, magazines obsessed over Taylor's romances, jewelry, and lavish lifestyle. She was arranging hospital visits and recovery periods almost completely outside the publicity machine. Taylor rarely used Maria's condition for sympathy or press attention. She spoke proudly of all 4 children and tried to give them privacy despite the cameras around her. Maria later married, became a mother, and lived mostly away from Hollywood. That contrast matters. Taylor's public life was spectacular, but one of her most meaningful roles was far less glamorous, protecting a daughter whose childhood involved doctors, surgery, and long recovery rather than red carpets. Number 2. Richard Burton. Few fans remember that Richard Burton's marriage to Elizabeth Taylor also made him the adoptive father of Maria, a child whose congenital hip condition required repeated treatment. The public saw yachts, jewels, arguments, and one of the loudest romances in celebrity history. Inside the household, there were also operations, appointments, and long periods of recovery. Burton legally accepted Maria as his daughter and remained part of the family structure even after his marriage to Taylor became chaotic. That does not turn him into a perfect father. His drinking, absences, and turbulent behavior created instability that affected everyone around him. Still, Maria's place in his life complicates the usual image of Burton as only the brilliant actor trapped inside an explosive love affair. He had responsibilities that did not disappear when photographers left. Behind the booming voice and glamorous scandals was a man connected to a child whose needs could not be solved with money, fame, or applause. That quieter family role rarely became part of the Burton legend. Enjoying these forgotten Hollywood stories? Subscribe now so you never miss another journey behind the screen. And share this video with someone who believes the real stories are often more powerful than the movies. Number 3. Spencer Tracy. Long before Spencer Tracy became one of Hollywood's most admired leading men, his infant son John was discovered to be profoundly deaf. Louise Tracy noticed that the baby did not react to sound, and the diagnosis devastated the family at a time when support for deaf children was extremely limited. Doctors offered little optimism. Louise refused those expectations and began studying methods that could help John communicate. She worked with him on speech, lip reading, and education, while Spencer helped finance the effort. Tracy also struggled emotionally. Biographers described guilt that sometimes created distance between father and son, as though John's deafness were somehow a punishment. It was not, but that belief shows how misunderstood disability could be. The family's response eventually helped thousands of others. Louise founded the John Tracy Clinic for families of deaf and hard-of-hearing children, and Spencer supported it financially. John later developed severe vision loss as well. One private diagnosis ended up reshaping the lives of families far beyond Hollywood. Number 4. Bette Davis. Motherhood became far more complicated than Bette Davis expected after she and Gary Merrill adopted a baby girl named Margot. During early childhood, Margot was diagnosed with serious developmental and neurological disabilities and eventually required specialized supervision. Davis first tried to care for her at home, but as the child grew, the demands became difficult for the household to manage. Margot later entered residential care, a decision that has been judged harshly in biographies and family memoirs. The era matters. Mid-century parents often faced a brutal choice between exhausting home care and institutions whose quality varied enormously. Even a wealthy movie star could struggle to find dependable long-term support. Davis insisted that adopting Margot had not been a mistake. Financial arrangements for her care continued even after Davis and Merrill divorced. Margot lived mostly outside public view, almost erased from the glamorous image surrounding her mother. Yet her story reveals a part of Bette Davis's life that cannot be understood through Oscars, feuds, or sharp dialogue alone. By this point, one pattern is already impossible to ignore. Hollywood sold audiences the fantasy that money could solve almost anything, yet disability exposed the limits of that illusion. Expensive doctors, private schools, and household staff could help, but they could not erase uncertainty. Parents still had to decide whom to trust, which treatments to try, and whether to accept advice that often reflected prejudice as much as medicine. The most revealing part of these stories is not that famous people faced hardship, it is that fame could not protect their children from the low expectations built into the era. Number 5. Dorothy Dandridge. While Dorothy Dandridge was breaking barriers on screen, she was privately caring for her only child, Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas. Born in 1943, Harolyn developed severe intellectual and communication disabilities and required continuous support as she grew. Those needs placed enormous pressure on a mother whose career was already restricted by racism. Even after Dandridge became the first black woman nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress, fame did not bring the stable income or opportunities many viewers assumed. For years, she kept Harolyn away from publicity. That protected her daughter from gossip, but it also reflected an era when disability was treated like a family secret. As debts and career problems increased, Harolyn eventually entered state-supported care. That decision has sometimes been used to attack Dandridge, yet the circumstances included limited services, financial collapse, discrimination, and emotional exhaustion. Harolyn was not the cause of Dorothy Dandridge's struggles. Her needs simply revealed how little support even a celebrated Hollywood mother could rely on. Number 6. Gene Tierney. One careless encounter changed Gene Tierney's family forever. While pregnant, the actress contracted rubella after meeting an admirer who had reportedly broken quarantine. The illness could be mild for an adult, but during pregnancy, it could seriously affect a developing baby. Tierney's daughter Daria was born prematurely with disabilities associated with congenital rubella syndrome. She was deaf, partially blind because of cataracts, and had a significant intellectual disability. She required lifelong support and spent much of her life in residential care. Years later, Tierney reportedly learned that the contagious fan had only wanted the thrill of meeting a movie star. The realization haunted her, and later inspired elements of Agatha Christie's The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. Daria, however, was never a plot device. She was a real person who lived into her 60s. Tierney's later mental health struggles had many causes and should not be reduced to one event. But Daria's condition added grief, fear, and lasting responsibility behind one of Hollywood's most famously perfect faces. Number 7. Roy Rogers. America's smiling king of the cowboys faced a decision many parents were given in the 1950s. Roy Rogers and Dale Evans welcomed a daughter, Robin, who had Down syndrome. Doctors reportedly advised them to place her in an institution rather than bring her into ordinary family life. They refused. Robin lived at home with her siblings and appeared in family photographs during an era when many disabled children were deliberately hidden. Her life was tragically short. Before her second birthday, Robin became seriously ill and died from complications. The loss devastated the family, but Roy and Dale continued speaking about the value of her life instead of treating her as something shameful. That experience influenced the large blended family they later created through birth, adoption, and fostering. Rogers played simple heroes who protected vulnerable people. At home, the more meaningful test was accepting a child society expected him to hide. Robin's short life helped challenge the idea that Down syndrome automatically meant separation, secrecy, or a life without belonging. Number 8. Dale Evans. Grief changed Dale Evans from a Western entertainer into one of the earliest famous voices speaking openly about Down syndrome. After the death of her daughter Robin, Evans wrote Angel Unaware, a spiritual account inspired by the child's brief life. Some of its language now sounds dated, but its central message was unusual for the 1950s. Evans argued that Robin's life had dignity and meaning. She rejected the idea that disability automatically turned a family into a tragedy. That openness carried risk. Hollywood publicity carefully protected perfect family images, and celebrities were not expected to discuss developmental disability, institutional advice, or grief in public. Evans continued talking with parents and supporting causes connected to children with disabilities. Families who felt isolated suddenly saw a nationally known woman describing emotions they understood. She is remembered for cowboy costumes, television adventures, and happy trails. Yet Robin may have shaped her most lasting human legacy. By refusing secrecy, Dale Evans challenged a culture that expected many disabled children to remain invisible. Another uncomfortable truth sits behind these early cases. Institutional care was often presented as the responsible, even compassionate choice. Parents were told that a disabled child might damage a marriage, frighten siblings, or never benefit from ordinary family life. Some accepted that advice. Others rejected it completely. Looking back, it is tempting to judge every decision with modern knowledge, but the more useful question is what information families actually received at the time. These stories become most powerful when we notice how often doctors predicted a narrow future, and how often the children themselves later proved those predictions incomplete. Number 9. Louis Armstrong. Before Louis Armstrong became one of the most recognizable entertainers in the world, he accepted responsibility for a vulnerable child in his own family. Clarence Hatfield Armstrong was the son of Louis's cousin Flora, who died after giving birth. Armstrong helped raise Clarence and came to regard him as an adopted son. During childhood, Clarence suffered a serious head injury that left him with a developmental disability affecting his independence. Armstrong and his first wife, Daisy Parker, included him in their household while the musician's career was still developing. As Armstrong moved from New Orleans clubs to international stages, he continued providing financial support. That obligation existed long before the smiling public image and movie appearances that later defined him. Clarence appears only briefly in many popular biographies because disability and adoption do not fit the simple rags-to-riches story. Yet he mattered. Before Armstrong became a symbol of optimism, he had already learned that family responsibility could mean supporting someone whose needs continued long after childhood ended. Number 10. Burt Lancaster. The athletic legend surrounding Burt Lancaster made his son Bill's disability almost invisible to audiences. Bill contracted polio in childhood, and the illness left one leg shorter than the other. Growing up beside a father famous for acrobatics, strength, and powerful movement could have created impossible comparisons. Instead, Bill built a different career. After acting briefly, he became a respected screenwriter. His credits included The Bad News Bears and John Carpenter's The Thing. Polio survivors often dealt with surgery, pain, mobility differences, and social attitudes that treated physical limitation as weakness. Bill entered an industry obsessed with appearance while carrying one of Hollywood's most physically imposing surnames. Burt Lancaster never turned his son into a publicity story. That privacy helped Bill's work stand on its own, though it also meant many fans never knew what he had experienced. The father's legend depended on what his body could do on screen. The son showed another kind of resilience by creating memorable stories and refusing to be defined only by comparison. Number 11. Arthur Miller. Behind some of America's most celebrated plays lies one of the most uncomfortable family decisions connected to a major literary figure. Arthur Miller and photographer Inge Morath welcomed a son, Daniel, in 1966. The baby had Down syndrome, and doctors encouraged the parents to place him in an institution. Daniel was sent away while still an infant. Miller then almost completely removed his son from the public version of his life. He did not include Daniel in his autobiography, and many friends reportedly had no idea another child existed. The contradiction was impossible to ignore once the story became widely known. Miller wrote about moral courage, family responsibility, guilt, abandonment, and society's treatment of vulnerable people. Yet his own son grew up separated from the elegant household where writers, actors, and intellectuals regularly gathered. Institutional staff initially expected very little from Daniel. Later, after leaving the facility for supportive community living, he developed friendships, participated in activities, and displayed abilities that earlier professionals had failed to imagine. Near the end of his life, Miller reportedly visited Daniel more often and included him equally in his estate. Financial recognition mattered, but it could not restore the decades of family life Daniel had missed. This story is not merely about hypocrisy. It also reveals the authority doctors held over frightened parents during the 1960s. Even wealthy, educated families were told that separation was sensible. Daniel's later life showed how dangerously low those expectations had been. Number 12. Patricia Neal. A sudden street accident transformed Patricia Neal's family while her acting career was thriving. In December 1960, a taxi struck the baby carriage, carrying her 4-month-old son Theo. The collision caused a severe head injury and led to hydrocephalus, a dangerous buildup of fluid around the brain. Theo required repeated operations involving shunts designed to drain the fluid. The devices frequently became blocked, turning ordinary days into medical emergencies. Neal and her husband, writer Roald Dahl, moved between fear, exhaustion, and frustration as existing technology repeatedly failed their child. Rather than accept the situation, the family became involved in developing a better valve. Dahl worked with a neurosurgeon and a skilled engineer to produce an improved device that later helped thousands of other patients. Theo survived and gradually recovered. His mother would later face an extraordinary rehabilitation battle of her own, after suffering multiple strokes in 1965. Those strokes affected movement and speech, giving Neil a personal understanding of disability from both sides of the caregiving relationship. Her public image had always suggested strength, but real strength appeared in less glamorous forms, sitting through operations, learning medical language, tolerating uncertainty, and continuing to work while family life remained fragile. Theo's accident did not become a sentimental Hollywood story with an instant cure. It became a long process involving medical innovation and repeated risk. Neil's family turned one frightening experience into a practical contribution that improved treatment for children they would never meet. The next group also shows how a child's disability could reshape work far beyond the home. A parent might fund a clinic, invent medical equipment, change a touring schedule, or quietly abandon a career opportunity because care could not be delegated. Number 13. Roald Dahl. Few readers opening Charlie and the Chocolate Factory would imagine that its author helped design a piece of medical equipment. The project began because Roald Dahl's infant son Theo developed hydrocephalus after the taxi accident that seriously injured him. The standard shunt implanted to drain fluid from Theo's brain repeatedly malfunctioned. Dahl became intensely curious about why. He contacted Kenneth Till, a pediatric neurosurgeon, and Stanley Wade, an engineer experienced with precision hydraulic systems. Together, the three men developed the Wade-Dahl-Till valve. It was designed to reduce blockages, operate more reliably, and cost less than existing equipment. Thousands were eventually manufactured for patients with hydrocephalus and related conditions. Dahl accepted no royalties from the invention. The work began with desperation over his son, but he understood that other families faced the same crisis without his connections or ability to reach specialists. Theo improved enough that he did not ultimately depend on the finished version. Even so, his accident changed pediatric care. It also revealed a side of Dahl far removed from the darker controversies surrounding his personality and writing. The same obsessive imagination that created fantastical machines was redirected toward an actual medical problem. There were no magical sweets or friendly giants involved, only a father unwilling to accept that repeated equipment failure was unavoidable. Theo's story shows how disability and medical trauma can alter a parent's work in unexpected ways. One child's emergency inspired an invention that continued saving lives long after the Dahl family left the hospital. Number 14. Count Basie. The effortless swing of Count Basie's orchestra concealed the persistence taking place inside his family home. His only daughter, Diane, was born with cerebral palsy. Doctors reportedly warned that she might never walk, and advised her parents to consider institutional care. Count Basie and his wife Catherine rejected that recommendation. They raised Diane at home and arranged therapy, instruction, and daily physical practice. Over time, she learned to walk, and even to swim, achievements that challenged the absolute predictions delivered after her birth. Those accomplishments should not be described as a cure or proof that determination removes disability. Cerebral palsy affects movement in different ways, and Diane continued living with the condition. What changed was the range of opportunity surrounding her. Basie kept most family matters private. Audiences saw a calm bandleader guiding musicians through precise rhythms, not a father discussing appointments or accessibility. That silence protected Diane from publicity, but also left her story largely unknown. The family's resources made specialized assistance possible, yet money alone did not determine their choice. Wealthy parents were also encouraged to send disabled children away. The Basies chose daily involvement instead. Diane's life became part of a broader family commitment to disability organizations. Behind the orchestra's relaxed sound was a household confronting one of the era's most damaging assumptions: that a child's diagnosis allowed professionals to predict the entire future. Diane's progress proved that opportunity mattered as much as prognosis. Number 15. Pearl S. Buck. Literary success gave Pearl S. Buck an international platform, but her daughter Carol changed how she used it. Born in 1920, Carol developed an intellectual disability caused by phenylketonuria, usually called PKU. At the time, the metabolic condition was poorly understood, and no effective early screening system existed. Today, newborn testing and dietary treatment can prevent many severe effects of PKU. Carol was born before those protections. Buck searched for explanations while doctors offered confusion, blame, and little practical help. In 1929, Carol entered the Vineland Training School in New Jersey, where she remained for the rest of her life. The decision brought Buck grief and guilt, but she believed the setting could provide more consistent support than she could arrange while working and traveling. For years, the author protected the details. Then she published The Child Who Never Grew, an unusually direct account of intellectual disability, motherhood, uncertainty, and institutional care. Some terminology reflects its period, yet the book broke a powerful silence. Parents who had been treated as though they were alone discovered that a Nobel Prize-winning writer understood their fear. Buck also argued that disabled people deserved education, protection, and dignity rather than ridicule. Carol lived until 1992. Her life should not be remembered only as the source of her mother's sorrow. She influenced public conversation at a time when families were often told to disappear. Through Buck's writing, one private experience became a demand that society stop treating intellectual disability as a shameful secret. Number 16. Alec Guinness. A childhood illness involving Alec Guinness's only son affected the actor's spiritual life and family priorities. Matthew Guinness contracted polio at approximately 11 years old, when the disease still terrified parents across Europe and the United States. Polio could bring paralysis, breathing difficulties, long rehabilitation, or death. No one around the family could initially know whether Matthew would walk normally again or what permanent effects might remain. While working away from home, Alec began entering a Catholic church to pray for his son. He later described that period as part of the journey that led him toward conversion. The story is frequently told as a religious awakening, but Matthew was the child actually enduring illness, isolation, treatment, and recovery. Fortunately, he recovered sufficiently to pursue acting. Matthew built a long career in British theatre, film, and television, developing an identity beyond both polio and his father's enormous reputation. The experience remained part of Alec Guinness's private emotional world. Years before he became known internationally as Obi-Wan Kenobi, he had confronted the possibility that his child might live with major physical disability. Guinness was famous for restraint and rarely exposed family life for publicity. That privacy makes the episode less familiar than his film roles, yet it reveals the fear beneath his controlled public manner. For the actor, faith did not begin as an abstract intellectual exercise. It was tied to a parent's helplessness, while a son faced an illness that medicine could not yet reliably prevent. There is also a language problem when telling these stories. Older sources often use terms that are now considered disrespectful, and some parents describe disability through ideas of tragedy, cure, or burden that many disabled people reject today. Repeating that language without context would distort the story. The important facts are the diagnosis, the support a child needed, the choices adults made, and the opportunities society allowed or denied. Disability did not erase personality, intelligence, humor, ambition, or family identity. In several cases ahead, the most striking mistake was not the condition itself, but how confidently professionals underestimated the person living with it. Number 17. Oleg Cassini. Fashion designer Oleg Cassini was associated with elegance, celebrity romance, and Jacqueline Kennedy's White House wardrobe. His first daughter, however, required lifelong planning far removed from couture and social glamour. Daria was born during Cassini's marriage to Gene Tierney, after the actress contracted rubella while pregnant. The child was deaf, partially blind, and had a significant intellectual disability, connected to congenital rubella syndrome. Her care placed strain on an already unstable marriage. Cassini and Tierney eventually separated, and financial agreements included provisions for Daria's continuing support. Even after divorce ended the household, the responsibility remained. Residential care became a major part of Daria's life. Such arrangements were common at the time, though their quality varied, and families often struggled with guilt over whether separation was necessary. Cassini's later estate planning reportedly included money intended for his daughter. Legal disputes surrounding his fortune complicated matters, illustrating another problem faced by parents of disabled adults. Support must continue after the parent dies, sometimes through relatives who do not agree. The designer's public world celebrated perfect proportions, controlled appearances, and wealthy clients. Daria's world involved sensory barriers, dependence, and limited public recognition. The contrast exposes how carefully celebrity biographies separate glamour from caregiving. Daria lived into her 60s. She outlasted the era that expected children like her to remain invisible. Although she never became a public figure, her needs influenced the marriage, finances, and decisions of two celebrated people for decades. Number 18. Harold Nicholas. Few dancers in cinema history moved with the astonishing precision of Harold Nicholas. As one half of the Nicholas brothers, he performed routines so demanding that later stars watched them in disbelief. His family life, however, contained a responsibility that did not fit the joy preserved in those musical sequences. Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas, his daughter with Dorothy Dandridge, had severe intellectual and communication disabilities. Dandridge later connected the condition to complications around the birth, although that explanation remained her belief, rather than a confirmed medical conclusion. As the marriage deteriorated, Dandridge carried most of the daily and financial responsibility for Harolyn. Historical accounts describe Harold as increasingly absent from the household before the couple divorced. Acknowledging that absence does not erase his artistic importance. It does, however, complicate the uncomplicated celebration surrounding his work. On-screen, he appeared capable of impossible physical control. At home, he belonged to a family confronting a situation no amount of talent could organize neatly. Harolyn eventually required state-supported care after Dandridge's finances collapsed. Her story is usually told only through her mother's pain, leaving Harold's parental role almost unmentioned. Including him restores an uncomfortable part of the record. Disabled children do not belong solely to whichever parent performs the most visible caregiving. Harold remained part of the family history, even when distance defined that relationship. The famous dance numbers still deserve admiration. Yet the man performing them also had a daughter whose needs continued when the music stopped and the audience went home. Number 19. Louise Treadwell Tracy. Before becoming a nationally recognized advocate, Louise Treadwell Tracy had an acting career of her own. Everything changed after she realized that her infant son John did not respond to sound. Doctors confirmed that he was profoundly deaf and offered the family almost no hope. Louise refused the era's assumption that deafness meant a child could not communicate, learn, or participate fully in family life. She studied available teaching methods and devoted herself to helping John develop speech and lip reading. Other parents soon began asking for guidance. What started as one mother's search grew into the John Tracy Clinic, founded in 1942. The organization offered services to families of deaf and hard-of-hearing children, including correspondence courses for those unable to travel to Los Angeles. That mail-based outreach was revolutionary before online education or widespread early intervention programs. Families in distant communities could receive structured help without leaving home. Spencer Tracy's fame attracted publicity and funding, but Louise built the program's philosophy and daily operation. Her achievement challenges the habit of describing women connected to male stars only as wives. John later developed serious vision loss related to Usher syndrome, making communication even more complicated. Louise continued adapting rather than surrendering to predictions. Her advocacy was not based on pretending disability disappeared. It was based on believing that children deserve tools, education, and parental involvement. One diagnosis redirected her life, and the institution she created eventually supported thousands of families who had never imagined a Hollywood household could understand their experience. Number 20. Inga Morath. The decision to institutionalize Daniel Miller is usually attached to Arthur Miller's name, but his mother's experience was more complicated. Photographer Inga Morath gave birth to Daniel in 1966 and learned that he had Down syndrome. Medical advice strongly favored sending the baby away. Daniel entered an institution during infancy. Friends later recalled that Morath visited him regularly, sometimes almost every week, while Miller rarely acknowledged the child publicly. Those visits do not erase the original separation, but they suggest that mother and father responded differently after the decision was made. Morath reportedly described the institution in deeply disturbing terms. Yet Daniel remained there through childhood, apart from his sister Rebecca and from the sophisticated household where artists, writers, and actors often gathered. The contradiction is painful. Morath traveled internationally, photographing ordinary people with sensitivity, but her own son grew up largely outside the family narrative. Fear, professional authority, marriage, and social prejudice all shaped that outcome. After leaving institutional care, Daniel moved into a supportive community and developed friendships and routines that earlier experts had not expected. His adulthood demonstrated how badly the original predictions underestimated him. Morath died before the full story became widely public. It would be unfair to simplify her into either villain or devoted mother. She maintained contact yet accepted separation. Both facts matter. Her experience shows how even educated, compassionate people could become trapped inside a system that presented institutionalization as responsible parenting. Daniel's life later exposed the cost of that supposedly practical advice. By the middle of the list, another issue becomes clear. The famous parent was not always the person doing most of the caregiving. Wives, ex-wives, grandparents, siblings, teachers, and residential staff often carried the repetitive work, while one celebrity name dominated the public story. That matters because caregiving is easy to romanticize from a distance. Real support can mean years of appointments, paperwork, transportation, therapy, communication practice, financial planning, and arguments with schools or institutions. When a family succeeded, it was rarely because one star made a dramatic gesture. More often, progress came from people repeating ordinary tasks long after reporters lost interest. Number 21. Catherine Basie. While Count Basie traveled with one of the world's most respected orchestras, Catherine Basie became the central force in their daughter Diane's daily development. The child had cerebral palsy, and doctors reportedly predicted that she would never walk. Catherine rejected both that prediction and suggestions that Diane should be placed in an institution. She arranged professional help, supervised exercises, and created a home environment built around participation rather than exclusion. Progress came gradually. Diane learned to walk and later to swim. Those achievements were not proof that cerebral palsy could simply be overcome through effort. They demonstrated that a child given therapy, time, and high expectations might accomplish far more than an early diagnosis predicted. Catherine expanded her concern into public service, supporting organizations connected to cerebral palsy, visual disability, and community welfare. Because her husband generated the headlines, her work received far less attention than his music. Yet she was the person managing appointments, education, equipment, household routines, and the emotional effect of repeatedly hearing what her daughter would supposedly never do. This labor rarely appeared in glamorous profiles of the Basie family. Their money provided access many parents lacked, but the important choice was philosophical. Catherine treated Diane as a member of the household whose future had not already been decided. That position challenged the medical culture of the 1940s. Catherine Basie's legacy belongs not only in the biography of a famous bandleader, but in the history of mothers who refuse to confuse disability with absence of potential. Number 22. Barry Sullivan. A controlled, hard-edged image made Barry Sullivan a dependable presence in film noir, westerns, and television drama. His private journals revealed something much more vulnerable: a father attempting to understand his developmentally disabled son, John. Sullivan wrote observations and letters about his children across many years. After his death, his daughter Jenny discovered the material and used portions of it in the autobiographical stage work J for J. The play explored the relationship between Jenny, John, and their father. It examined sibling responsibility, unequal expectations, embarrassment, loyalty, anger, affection, and the pressure to become a future caregiver before fully understanding what that role would involve. Rather than presenting the family as endlessly noble, the work allowed difficult emotions to remain visible. That honesty matters because relatives of disabled people are often expected to display perfect patience. Real households contain frustration and love at the same time. Sullivan's stardom added another contrast. Audiences knew him as a commanding man who could control any scene. At home, he could not control how his son developed or remove the uncertainty surrounding John's adulthood. The private writings showed a parent searching for connection rather than performing certainty. Jenny's later play transformed those records into a broader conversation about disability and family obligation. John's life therefore continued influencing audiences after Sullivan's death. He was not merely a secret child hidden behind an actor's career. Number 23. Julie Newmar. The actress, remembered as television's elegant Catwoman, accepted a role more demanding than any costume or stunt. Julie Newmar's son John was born with Down syndrome. At about 3 years old, meningitis caused him to lose his hearing, adding a major communication barrier to his developmental disability. Newmar raised John as a single mother. She learned sign language, adjusted the household, and developed routines that did not depend on conventional speech or hearing. Medical professionals had offered limited expectations, but she concentrated on what her son enjoyed and understood. Her acting career became less visible during the 1980s, partly because motherhood required stability. Property investments gave her greater control over time than constant filming would have allowed. That practical decision rarely appears in discussions of why certain actresses disappear from screens. In later life, John continued living with his mother. Newmar spoke about him with pride and humor, instead of presenting herself as a tragic caregiver. She described companionship, shared routines, and the meaning he brought to her life. The contrast with Catwoman is striking. That character was independent, untouchable, and accountable to nobody. Motherhood required Newmar to be dependable every day, especially when communication took patience. As she grew older, the future of John's care naturally became a serious concern. Support for an adult disabled child does not end when childhood finishes or when the parent becomes elderly. Newmar's story reveals the long duration of caregiving. Number 24. Mia Farrow. Personal experience with polio shaped Mia Farrow long before she adopted children with physical disabilities. At 9 years old, she contracted the disease, experienced paralysis, and spent time isolated in a hospital ward before recovering. As an adult, Farrow created an unusually large family through birth and adoption. Several children had significant medical or physical needs. Moses, adopted from Korea, had cerebral palsy. Thaddeus, adopted from India, lived with mobility impairments connected to polio and used a wheelchair. Other children had visual or health-related disabilities. Farrow's family later became surrounded by painful disputes and sharply conflicting accounts. Those controversies should not erase the documented reality that she accepted children whom many adoption systems considered difficult to place. Her own childhood may have influenced that decision. She understood physical vulnerability, separation from family, and the fear created when a young person's body suddenly stops behaving as expected. Raising a large family with different needs required medical coordination, accessible environments, educational planning, and long-term financial arrangements. Celebrity wealth helped, but it did not eliminate emotional conflict or every practical barrier. Public discussion often reduced Farrow either to saintly rescuer or deeply flawed parent. Both images are too simple. Her disabled children possess their own perspectives and complicated relationships that cannot be used merely to prove something about their mother. Their stories show that adoption, disability, love, trauma, privilege, and family conflict can exist together. Hollywood prefers one clear emotional message, but real families rarely provide such a convenient ending. Privacy creates another tension. Viewers naturally want details, especially when a famous family has kept something hidden for decades. But a child does not lose the right to privacy because a parent became a movie star. Some people on this list later spoke publicly about their own disability. Others did not. That difference matters. The goal should not be to turn medical history into gossip. It should be to understand how attitudes toward disability shaped families and careers. The most responsible stories stop where the public record stops. Silence can hide shame, but it can also be a deliberate attempt to protect someone from being reduced to a diagnosis. Number 25. Aretha Franklin. Private arrangements Aretha Franklin made for her eldest son became clearer during legal examination of her estate. Clarence Franklin, born when Aretha was very young, later lived with a mental health disability that required assistance and supported living. Court records indicated that he had spent time in residential facilities and was placed under guardianship. His exact diagnosis remained private, so responsible accounts should not invent details that the family never confirmed. Aretha's handwritten estate documents included instructions intended to protect Clarence's future. Such planning reflected a serious reality. An adult child who needs ongoing support may require different financial arrangements from siblings who live independently. Clarence also possessed creative ability. Family reports identified songs he had written, including material connected to his mother's recording career. That fact is important because disabled adults are frequently described only through care costs, diagnoses, or legal dependency. He was also a son, a writer, and an individual with interests that existed beyond probate papers. Aretha carefully protected her family's privacy, even though her music expressed intense emotion to millions of listeners. After her death, arguments over several handwritten wills dominated the headlines. Beneath the courtroom drama was a more human question. How could a globally famous mother make certain that a vulnerable adult son remained supported when she was no longer present? Number 26. Neil Young. Two separate cerebral palsy diagnoses transformed Neil Young's understanding of parenting. His first son, Zeke, born during his relationship with actress Carrie Snodgrass, had a comparatively mild form of cerebral palsy. Years later, Neil and Peggy Young welcomed Ben, whose condition significantly affected movement and speech. Their daughter Amber also lived with epilepsy, a neurological condition Neil himself had experienced. The family therefore became familiar with doctors, seizures, mobility support, communication technology, and educational systems that frequently underestimated children whose bodies functioned differently. When suitable schooling for Ben proved difficult to find, Neil and Peggy helped establish the Bridge School in 1986. It served children with severe physical and communication disabilities and used assistive technology to help students express choices, thoughts, and academic understanding. Annual benefit concerts attracted extraordinary performers, including Bruce Springsteen, Tony Bennett, Pearl Jam, Metallica, and many others. The famous lineups generated publicity, but the school's purpose came directly from Ben's everyday experience. Neil sometimes discussed disability through music and interviews, yet he resisted treating his sons as symbols of sadness. He recognized that limited speech did not reveal the limits of a person's thoughts. For a musician celebrated for independence and refusal to follow authority, fatherhood produced a practical form of rebellion. The young family rejected school systems that assumed physical disability meant intellectual inability. Ben and Zeke did not interrupt Neil Young's story. Number 27. Carrie Snodgrass. An Academy Award nomination placed Carrie Snodgrass on the edge of major stardom after Diary of a Mad Housewife. Instead of following the expected Hollywood path, she stepped away from acting during her relationship with Neil Young and the early childhood of their son Zeke. Zeke had cerebral palsy. His condition was described as less severe than that of his younger half-brother Ben, but he still experienced physical challenges and required support. Comparing disabled children can be misleading because every person's needs and strengths develop differently. After separating from Young, Snodgrass carried much of the daily parenting responsibility. She balanced therapy, schooling, household stability, and the slow attempt to rebuild an acting career that had lost its earlier momentum. Returning to work was not simply a matter of accepting a role. Production schedules can involve long hours, distant locations, and sudden changes. Every job required arranging reliable care and deciding whether professional opportunity justified disruption at home. Popular accounts sometimes blame Snodgrass's interrupted career entirely on her relationship with Neil Young. Zeke's childhood provides another essential part of the explanation. She had made decisions based on a child whose needs could not be scheduled around auditions. The story also reflects the unequal professional cost, often carried by mothers. Two parents may both care deeply, while the person handling daily routines loses more freedom. Zeke later developed an adult identity and worked in sound-related roles. Number 28. Peggy Young. Before becoming a recording artist herself, Peggy Young spent years searching for an educational environment that understood her son Ben. Cerebral palsy significantly affected his movement and speech, but his parents recognized that an inability to speak did not mean an inability to think. Available programs often failed to separate physical limitations from intellectual ability. Peggy responded by helping create an alternative. Working with Neil Young, educators, specialists, and other parents, she co-founded the Bridge School in 1986. Students used augmentative and assistive communication tools to participate in lessons, express preferences, build relationships, and demonstrate knowledge. The approach challenged the assumption that spoken language was the only reliable evidence of intelligence. Peggy's contribution was not limited to standing beside a famous husband during benefit concerts. The school grew from her direct experience navigating services, meetings, and disappointing expectations for Ben. Annual acoustic concerts became legendary, but celebrity performance was only the fundraising mechanism. Inside classrooms, teachers and students were doing the quieter work of communication, access, and inclusion. Peggy later released albums and established an artistic identity beyond wife and mother. Disability advocacy nevertheless remained central to her public legacy because it had transformed private frustration into a durable institution. When she died, tributes appropriately mentioned both music and the Bridge School. Ben inspired the effort, but Peggy organized a response that reached many families with no celebrity connections. Number 29. Sylvester Stallone. Audiences saw Sylvester Stallone as a symbol of physical power when his younger son received an autism diagnosis. Sergio Stallone was born during Sylvester's marriage to photographer and actress Sasha Jack and appeared briefly as Rocky Balboa's baby in Rocky II. By around 3 years old, his parents had noticed developmental differences and sought medical evaluation. The diagnosis arrived when public knowledge of autism was limited and often surrounded by fear. Stallone admitted that acceptance was difficult. Sergio's development did not match the future his father had imagined, and no amount of determination could turn the situation into a familiar Rocky-style victory. The family established a research fund connected to autism organizations. Stallone used premieres and celebrity events to attract donations, while Sasha managed much of the daily therapy and educational work. Sergio grew up almost entirely outside publicity. That privacy protected him from becoming a permanent tabloid subject, although it also meant many fans forgot that Stallone had another son from his first marriage. The actor's famous characters solved problems through strength, training, and endurance. Parenting an autistic child required adaptation rather than conquest. There was no villain to defeat, and no final scene in which every difference disappeared. Stallone had to discover another definition of strength: supporting treatment, respecting a private life, and accepting that a child's path may not resemble the one a parent planned. Number 30. Sasha Jack. Public attention naturally focused on Sylvester Stallone, but Sasha Jack handled much of the daily responsibility after their son Sergio was diagnosed with autism. Stallone himself acknowledged that she performed the difficult work inside the home. Jack reduced professional activity to coordinate therapy, education, and family routines. During the early 1980s, autism services were far less developed than they are today. Parents often had to assemble programs themselves, while specialists offered conflicting explanations. The family possessed money and access, yet wealth could not create a clear roadmap. Autism was poorly understood by schools, doctors, and the public. Progress was often measured through small changes that would never interest entertainment reporters. Sasha also helped establish the research fund associated with Sergio's diagnosis. Stallone could draw cameras and donations through premieres, but she managed the repetitive work that continued after every fundraiser ended. Their marriage ended in 1985. Divorce did not remove the need for long-term planning or coordinated parental support. It simply changed the structure through which that support had to occur. Jack's experience reflects a familiar pattern in celebrity families. The famous father's emotional comments become widely repeated, while the mother's daily labor receives one brief paragraph. Sergio's protected adulthood means the public knows little about his current life, and that boundary deserves respect. What is documented is that Sasha reorganized major parts of her career and identity around his support. Her story is not glamorous, but it is essential. Number 31. John Travolta. Family tragedy revealed information John Travolta and Kelly Preston had previously kept largely private. Their eldest son, Jet, had a history of seizures and was later publicly identified by his parents as autistic. Jet died in January 2009 after experiencing a seizure during a family trip to the Bahamas. He was 16 years old. Before his death, discussion of his health had been limited and frequently distorted by tabloid speculation. Afterward, the family confirmed his seizure disorder and autism while grieving under extraordinary attention. Travolta described losing Jet as the most devastating experience of his life. He established the Jet Travolta Foundation, supporting organizations serving children with disabilities, medical conditions, and other needs. The charitable work gave the family a way to connect Jet's memory with assistance for others. His story should not be reduced to the circumstances of his death. Photographs and parental tributes describe an affectionate teenager who was deeply loved by his parents and sister Ella. The case also demonstrates why famous families sometimes protect medical information. Public disclosure can encourage understanding, but it can expose a child to gossip from strangers who have no role in that child's care. For Travolta, protecting Jet's memory became as important as explaining the medical facts surrounding his life. Number 32. Kelly Preston. After Jet's death, Kelly Preston spoke more openly about her son's autism and seizure history. Her confirmation ended years of speculation, although it came when Jet could no longer decide how much of his medical life should be public. Preston described him as an extraordinary source of joy and resisted portrayals that made disability the complete meaning of his existence. As the parent spending substantial time away from film sets, she managed many everyday routines while Travolta's work often involved travel. The family pursued treatments and explanations that created public debate. Those claims should not be mistaken for settled medical evidence. What can be stated clearly is that Jet was autistic, experienced seizures, and was deeply loved. Preston later welcomed another son, Benjamin. She explained that expanding the family helped restore happiness without replacing Jet. She continued celebrating his birthday and including his memory in family life. When Preston died in 2020, tributes focused on her films and marriage. Her experience as Jet's mother was equally central to who she had become. The story reminds viewers to separate acknowledgement from speculation. A disabled child in a famous household is still entitled to dignity and privacy. Her later interviews kept returning to the same point. Jet was a son before he was a diagnosis. These later stories also show how public understanding changed unevenly. Autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, deafness, and other disabilities became more visible, but stereotypes remained powerful. Number 33. Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro guarded his family so carefully that many fans did not know his son Elliot was autistic until the actor confirmed it publicly in 2016. The disclosure appeared during controversy involving a documentary scheduled for the Tribeca Film Festival. De Niro explained that autism affected his family directly. After further review, the festival removed the film from its program. The argument threatened to transform Elliott into evidence for competing public positions. De Niro largely returned to protecting his son's privacy. One positive part of Elliott's life became visible through Special Olympics, where tennis offered competition, confidence, recreation, and community beyond his father's fame. That image is more valuable than treating autism as a puzzle outsiders must solve. It shows an autistic young man participating in an activity suited to his interests. De Niro's career is built on intense observation, but parenting required him to accept that not every question should receive a public answer. He could advocate for discussion without narrating Elliott's entire medical history. Celebrity parents are criticized both for silence and for oversharing. De Niro attempted to stand between those extremes, confirming the diagnosis while preserving boundaries. His disclosure surprised millions and proved that even one of the world's most examined actors could protect a major part of family life for years. Elliott should not be remembered merely as Robert De Niro's autistic son. His participation in sports, relationships, and private adulthood shows why a diagnosis can describe support needs without containing the whole person. Number 34. Ed Asner. The gruff warmth Ed Asner brought to Lou Grant reflected something audiences also saw in his disability advocacy. His son Charlie was autistic, and Asner's grandson was later diagnosed with autism as well. Charlie's abilities did not fit simplistic assumptions. Asner described him as highly intelligent, with strong interests in mathematics, physics, writing, and art. At the same time, autism affected communication, independence, and the family's need for support. In 2018, members of the family established the Ed Asner Family Center. It developed recreational, therapeutic, vocational, and mental health programs for disabled individuals and their relatives. The focus on whole families was significant. Parents and siblings can experience exhaustion, financial pressure, isolation, and uncertainty, yet many services concentrate only on the diagnosed person. Asner understood that supporting an autistic individual also means strengthening the household around that person. His fame helped attract attention, but the center was shaped by lived family experience. The actor had long used his public voice for labor, political, and humanitarian causes. Autism advocacy became another extension of his willingness to challenge systems that failed vulnerable people. He did not describe Charlie as an eternal child or a burden. He spoke of an adult son with real talents and genuine support needs. Behind the famously irritated television voice was a father trying to build the community resource his own family had needed. Charlie's life turned a private concern into a public institution designed to give other families greater opportunity and less isolation. Number 35. John C. McGinley. Landing the role of Dr. Perry Cox on Scrubs gave John C. McGinley more than a successful television character. Because the series filmed near his home, it allowed him to remain closely involved in raising his son Max, who has Down syndrome. Max was born in 1997. McGinley later became a single father for part of his childhood, balancing school meetings, medical appointments, social activities, and acting work. He became an international spokesperson and board member for the Global Down Syndrome Foundation. He also joined campaigns challenging insulting language aimed at people with intellectual disabilities. At home, ordinary routines were adapted rather than abandoned. Family activities and celebrations were designed so Max could participate safely and meaningfully. As an adult, Max explored work, music, and alternative communication. McGinley has spoken honestly about his son being largely non-speaking, while emphasizing that limited speech does not mean limited understanding. The actor's most famous character insulted nearly everybody around him. Off-screen, McGinley asked people to recognize how casual insults can reinforce real prejudice. He never claimed that love removed every difficulty. Instead, he described fatherhood as a continuing education in patience, access, and listening beyond spoken words. Max did not end his father's career. He influenced which opportunities McGinley accepted and what he chose to do with celebrity attention. Their story shows that inclusion is built through repeated practical choices, not one emotional speech. Number 36. Gary Cole. When Gary Cole's daughter Mary received an autism diagnosis in 1995, the actor had almost no accurate popular culture to guide him. He later joked that his primary reference was the movie Rain Man. That narrow representation encouraged the idea that autism followed one recognizable pattern. Mary quickly demonstrated that real autistic children could not be understood through a single film character. Cole and his wife, actress Teddy Siddall, pursued early educational and therapeutic support. He later emphasized responding to a child's individual development instead of waiting for autism to match a stereotype. Mary grew up mostly away from entertainment publicity. Cole discussed the diagnosis when it might help awareness, but avoided turning her private life into a promotional story. His comments also showed how dramatically autism knowledge changed after the 1990s. Families once received limited information, inconsistent programs, and predictions based more on fear than evidence. Cole continued moving between comedy, drama, voice acting, and television. Viewers knew him as the unbearable boss in Office Space, or as a dependable authority figure, rarely realizing disability advocacy had become part of his family life. Mary's diagnosis did not create one dramatic transformation suitable for a movie ending. It began an ongoing process of learning, adjusting expectations, and discovering which supports helped her participate. Her privacy is part of the story, rather than an absence from it. Number 37. Joe Mantegna. A teacher's simple decision changed what Joe Mantegna expected from education for his autistic daughter Mia. During a period when the family lived in Chicago, the teacher introduced Mia to the class, explained that she might communicate or move differently, and asked other children to support her participation. For Mantegna and his wife Arlene, the moment demonstrated genuine inclusion. Mia had been diagnosed when autism was less widely understood, and the family had already encountered uncertainty and low expectations. Her younger sister Gia eventually surpassed her in some developmental areas, creating complicated emotions inside the household. Rather than hiding those differences, the parents encouraged the sisters to build a relationship around Mia's actual personality. As an adult, Mia pursued training in makeup and participated in inclusive filmmaking programs. Her accomplishments did not erase support needs, but they challenged institutions that had never imagined an autistic student entering their classrooms or workplaces. Mantegna used his celebrity to support autism organizations, host events, and promote inclusive media. He also acknowledged that fame gave his family access many others lacked. When asked what it felt like to have an autistic daughter, he responded that he did not know what life without one felt like. That answer rejected pity and false heroism. Mia was not an interruption to the family's normal life. She was part of what made their normal exist. Number 38. Laura Sangiacomo. A talking computer became part of daily communication between Laura Sangiacomo and her son Mason. Born with cerebral palsy, Mason did not develop independent speech, sitting, or walking in the way many children do. Sangiacomo initially experienced fear and frustration. She later admitted that much of her reaction came from the negative way disability had been explained to her. As Mason grew, she became an advocate for inclusive education and accessible communication. His computer allowed him to express thoughts that strangers might otherwise assume were absent. That distinction became central to her message. A person's body may not reveal everything the person understands. Limited movement or speech should never be mistaken automatically for limited intelligence. She also challenged segregated schooling. Disabled and non-disabled students could learn together when schools provided appropriate assistance and expected genuine participation. Her acting career included major films and the successful comedy Just Shoot Me, but she often selected work that allowed a manageable family schedule. Mason occasionally joined her at disability events, preventing advocacy from speaking entirely about him while excluding his presence. Sangiacomo's changing perspective makes the story especially useful. She never pretended she understood everything from the beginning. She learned to replace assumptions about tragedy with attention to access, communication, and personality. That transformation is more believable than presenting celebrity parents as immediately perfect. Mason influenced not only her schedule but her understanding of intelligence and independence. Number 39. Stephanie Mills. Leaving Los Angeles gave Stephanie Mills the environment she wanted for her son Farad. Born with Down syndrome, he became the central reason she reconsidered where and how the family should live. Mills moved to North Carolina, seeking a calmer community and greater control than the entertainment industry's constant demands allowed. She did not abandon music. Instead, Farad gradually became part of her touring world. He has spoken proudly about traveling with his mother and seeing himself as one of her protectors. Their relationship became especially visible during a televised performance of Never Knew Love Like This Before. Mills sang directly to Farad as he joined her on stage, moving the audience and host. The moment could easily have become sentimental television. What made it meaningful was Farad's confidence and obvious participation. He was not merely discussed while sitting at the edge of the stage. He was part of the event, and aware of the affection being exchanged. Mills supported disability inclusion and encouraged parents to concentrate on their children's abilities. Farad later became involved in advocacy and creative projects. The singer had experienced fame since childhood, appearing on Broadway before becoming an R&B star. Motherhood forced her to decide which parts of celebrity deserved to remain. Rather than choose completely between career and family, she redesigned the career so her son could travel within it. Number 40. Emily Pearl Kingsley. One child helped change what millions of young viewers saw on television. Emily Pearl Kingsley was already writing for Sesame Street when her son Jason was born with Down syndrome in 1974. Medical advice was brutally limiting. Kingsley was encouraged to expect very little, and was told that institutional placement remained an option. She and her husband rejected those predictions. As Jason learned letters, numbers, and words, Emily recognized a contradiction. The television program where she worked celebrated diversity, yet disabled people were nearly invisible. Jason began appearing on Sesame Street while still young. His presence allowed children to see someone with Down syndrome participating naturally, rather than being introduced only as a problem requiring explanation. Kingsley continued advocating for disabled performers, accessible stories, and language that treated disability as part of human diversity. These families lived when disability was often misunderstood, hidden, or treated as shameful. Some stars answered with advocacy and inclusion, while others made decisions that still raise painful questions. But the children were never scandals. They were individuals whose lives exposed society's low expectations. Subscribe for more carefully researched stories from classic entertainment, and share this video so these family histories can be remembered with honesty, dignity, compassion, and respect.